Welcome, eCom Logistics Nation. Thank you for joining today's episode. We're on a mission to share e-commerce logistics insights, trends, successes, and challenges from the leaders and innovators in our space.
Consumers don't always care about 2-day delivery. They don't always care about 30-minute delivery. They care about certainty. They know when they're buying for. If they're buying a dress that they need tomorrow for an event, they won't use Shein. But if they know that this event isn't for 2 months and they want to try a few different things, it works perfectly.
Welcome to the eCom Logistics Podcast in our special series, shining the light on women in supply chain, retail, and e-commerce throughout the month of March. Joining us today is Melissa Minkow, Director of Retail Strategy at CI&T, a global digital solutions provider for some of the world's largest retailers and companies. Previously, she was a senior principal advisor focusing on omni-channel retail, e-commerce, and social commerce at global research and advisory company Gartner, and starting her career as a business analyst in merchandising strategy at Target. Melissa is a RETHINK Retail Top Influencer, a RetailWire BrainTrust Expert, and a retail futurist whose methodology is rooted in cross-industry consumer insights and innovation. Melissa, we're super excited to have you join us today. Thank you for joining the podcast and welcome.
Thanks. I'm super excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, based on that intro, I would say she knows a thing or two about retail.
A thing or two. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. And I think that's a great place to start, Melissa. You started your career just a little over 10 years ago. And as I just mentioned, as a merchandising strategy associate at Target, and have really made a great name for yourself and rose through the ranks pretty quickly. So would just love to hear your story, your journey, and how you got to this point.
Thank you so much. Well, I guess it all started technically at Anthropologie. I worked on the sales floor there in the summers during college, and I really enjoyed it. I couldn't believe how much process went into just being on the store floor. We would be there for up to 3 hours after stores closed and up to 4 hours before stores opened. And that was my first kind of access point into, there's a whole world behind what you see when you go into a brick and mortar environment. And I really enjoyed it. I also had dreams of being a buyer. I saw Devil Wears Prada. I got really anxious about it based on
it's a great movie
assessment of how that works. But I still kind of wanted to go after that. And I pursued a degree in marketing at UW-Madison. Really enjoyed that. And kind of the intersection between marketing and retail, continued with that throughout my career, and also ended up pursuing that in grad school as well. At Kellogg, also mostly focused on market research and marketing. So just kind of double, triple, quadruple down on the hybrid between marketing and retail. But after college, I went to Target to work there for about 2 years, as you mentioned, in merchandise presentation and store layouts. My training for the first 12 weeks was Target US, but I was immediately thrown into Target Canada once my training was up. So that was a really fun experiment. And just before Target Canada closed down, I jumped ship and went to a company that was owned by corporate executive board at the time called Iconoculture. It was all consumer insights research, so doing advisory work. And I was focused on retailers because of the experience I had at Target. And then in, I believe, 2018, Gartner bought corporate executive boards. So I transferred over into the Gartner world. And my perspective in retail got much broader as a result of needing to do retail coverage for Gartner clients in addition to corporate executive board clients. And then my current employer, CI&T, was a client at Gartner, and they kind of brought me over to do the work that I was doing at Gartner, but specifically for CI&T, and really enjoying continuing to be in this world.
Yeah. And so just picking up on that thread at the beginning, right, which is that Target piece. So for the listeners, and we spoke about this in the prep as well. So I spent a few years at Target in Canada as well. I was there at the beginning and I was actually there at the end. And we discussed, you were on the merchandising side. I was more on the distribution side of things, building the warehouses necessary to support the network. And I think everyone that was involved in that, and, for the listeners, just a little bit of background, launched in 2012. By 2015, January, bankruptcy was filed for Target in Canada. So it was a really short run. I was there from 2012 to 2015. And I guess Melissa had the honors of doing the same thing as well on that front. if we were to, everyone's got some experiences around it to share. Well, how do we take those experiences as we talk about moving from one country to another, and specifically retailers and now brands, right? The organic brands. So if a retailer like Target had a challenge moving into a country that is so parallel to the United States, right? Like if other than the currency being different and having a different type of government, it's pretty much, we are the same people. And there was still struggles making that happen. What would you say to brands, based on those experiences, like what not to do and what should they do when moving to a new country?
Yeah, I think this is an even more important lesson now that globalization is everything in retail. I mean, we have one of the biggest retailers is Shein now in the US, and that's a Chinese retailer, right? Reach is wider than it's ever been. So consumers have much more access today to international brands than they even did back in 2012, 2013, 2014. So these are really important lessons that I think a lot of retailers are learning now, and Target learned it back then when we were there. The biggest things I would say is, first of all, and you kind of alluded to this, don't mistake proximity for sameness. Canada is, you could call it our front yard or our backyard. It's so close to us, but that does not mean that people shop the same ways there. That doesn't mean it's the same language for everybody there. In a lot of cases, the primary language is French. We don't have that being the case here in the US. There are very different regulations and restrictions on retailers there just because we have very different political structures. There were also some issues, and I know you know this because like you said, we talked about this with the technology that was being piloted. Target Canada was an experiment with so many variables that were brand new. And that is just not ideal. Usually you want to have as many control variables as possible when creating an experiment. And there was a lot of new technology being rolled out at the same time as they were rolling out into a new environment.
Yeah, no, I'm just shaking my head going, yes, I agree. Yes. And again, there were some, reasons that were kind of beyond me, beyond my, pay band, let's just say. But certain decisions, specifically on the technology front, that I can call out where, hey, we have all of these amazing tech in Target in the US that is so mature. And now we are going to go into this country with brand new ERP, brand new planogramming system, brand new forecasting and replenishment, brand new distribution systems, logistics, new partners, everything's new. And it was like, we give you a year and a half to build this entire network and launch 124 stores through the summer. I mean, and use the same processes, right? So if you got new systems, sometimes it's a good idea to use new processes as well. And, replication of existing processes were brought over. I didn't get to play very close part in like the merchandising side of things, but I could see the decisions of merchandising having an impact on me, right? Which was essentially having, 12 trucks of pink Barbie trucks sitting outside, right? Like loads full of that stuff, just sitting outside, just because a merchandising decision was made that, oh, we are getting a fire sale from some manufacturer in China. Let's just pick it up, right? Yeah, I can speak to it from a tech standpoint, but yeah, to the other points that you make, right? Little nuances like, Black Friday versus Boxing Day, right? And now Black Friday is a big thing in Canada as well, but it wasn't back in 2012, right? Like, so if you shape your demand accordingly, you're going to miss out on something. So it's little nuances. Yeah, very interesting. Anything else that you would like to say on that front? Like anyone trying to enter the Canadian space or vice versa, right? Any Canadians trying to enter the US space?
Yeah, I would say there are way more differences than you think, which is a positive thing. Definitely lean into those differences instead of kind of sweeping them under the rug. And the other thing you alluded to was that sense of urgency. This was all attempted in such a short period of time, which doesn't do anyone any favors. So I would just say slow and steady wins the race. Take your time. It's both an art and a science. I really think we tried to bring so much US process into Canada, and you really have to strike the perfect balance. So I'm very passionate about leveraging consumer insights and all that market research that I talked about in the beginning. It felt like there wasn't enough time for that. And so that's another piece that I think is really important too.
You dropped a really great nugget for us, Melissa, with Shein.
Yeah.
And I have, 3 teenage girls ranging from 13 to 19. So I am like the bullseye of their ICP.
Yes.
And I'm actually really fascinated by their entire business model and would love to get your perspective because, my girls will, let's just say they get some money for the holidays or for their birthday. The first thing they do is go to Shein's website. And, they drop $50 or $100. And the next thing you know, I almost have like a freight truck backing up with like all this product. But the reality is, and my kids, I think, are certainly of the, that this next generation coming out of COVID, where fast and free is the expectation from a consumer experience perspective. But with Shein, they've created this model where the exception is maybe I'm going to get it in 3 weeks, maybe I'm going to get it in 4 weeks, and everyone is okay with that. And they still rush to that website to place an order. And again, the product is less expensive, and maybe quality, so there's that triangle, like what do you want? Speed, quality,
exactly.
Convenience. So would just love like how you see that, the adoption rate there. And is that a model others could look at to embrace as well?
So I have to say, I'm a big fan of sustainable initiatives. So I can't with my whole heart say that anyone should embrace this model, because I think we all know anything fast fashion is not sustainable. It's not good for the environment. It's also not really good for the consumer, because it creates this kind of instant gratification idea where they're just generating so much of their own waste. It ends up just not even being good for the economy, right? So I can't really say it's a winning model, but is it winning right now? Absolutely. There's no denying it. Your family is a prime example of it's succeeding, right? I think it's especially fascinating because Gen Z and Generation Alpha, I think is what we've decided to call the next generation, right? They are very thrifty, but they also are very values-driven consumers. So it's surprising that they are embracing brands like Shein, knowing that there's not all that transparency behind their business practices and there's a lot of waste being created. So it's kind of a fascinating duality for younger generations, but I think there's no denying the impact this economy has on consumers. And we feel this stress of what's going on financially and inflation. And so and also the world has opened back up. We are, I always say intra-pandemic instead of post-pandemic because it's still going on, right? But we are behaving as if we're post-pandemic. We are going to events again. We are consuming at a pretty rapid pace again. And we need to balance that desire for consumption with the minimal spend that we have available to us. So for now, it's working. I think, when we see another shift in the economy, which we eventually inevitably will, with this younger generation who is so values oriented with their consumption, I would expect them to kind of shift back more towards sustainable, higher priced products that are more quality. But you also brought something up that's really interesting is they accept that this could arrive 3 weeks from now. Yeah. And that's something that I know we also talked a little bit about in our prep, which is consumers don't always care about 2-day delivery. They don't always care about 30-minute delivery. They care about certainty. They know when they're buying for. If they're buying a dress that they need tomorrow for an event, they won't use Shein. But if they know that this event isn't for 2 months and they want to try a few different things, it works perfectly. So it's really about certainty and delivery timelines. And that's a trend that I love seeing as more and more retailers are becoming very certain and prescriptive with when you will get a product to arrive. And that's what I think is a winning model, is just being really transparent around expectation with timing.
And so from an insight standpoint, do you think there is a pattern or, that you could discern that says, hey, kids between the age of even if it goes down to TikTok adoption, right? Things that are not good for us, we'll still do it. And, and using unsustainable solutions, for fast fashion versus, if you are up until 19, 20, you become college going where you start getting your first income, your buying pattern kind of changes, right? Is this not going to be perpetual, right? College going kids and under are always going to not have enough money to buy things that are, in fashion and are not fast fashion, right? So will that kind of continue on? And it's also an impact on the pocketbook, right? Who can spend? So,
Definitely. Yeah. I think we have a society that wants to buy. We live in this world where consumerism is at the core of everything. I mean, everything is becoming shoppable. There's no denying that we are shopping everything, absolutely. And everyone has a different level of means. And the younger you are, the less likely means you have to buy your own items. But I also think that, we see this de-influencing trend now too, where people are getting more frugal. They're getting smarter about how they spend their money. And we're seeing influencers say, don't buy this, buy the less expensive, alternative option because it's actually better. So there's also a savviness that's increasing with younger generations. The more we consume, the better we get at consuming, I like to think. So there's a little bit of that discernment happening too.
Makes sense.
Absolutely does. And I want to keep going on this thread because, we work with a lot of brands and retailers. And what's really, I think when you think of, or when you consider LTV from their perspective is a really important, critical element that they track and monitor. And LTV meaning long-term value of their clients. So, we have seen, brands pay a lot of attention to that. And what we have experienced through those relationships is they found that it's okay in some cases to have, the 4 to 7 day delivery.
Yeah.
There are certainly the Amazon-like, but based off the different personas of their clientele and their customers, the ability to offer deferred shipping. And would just love your thoughts here because as from a logistics standpoint, how your two of your biggest spends are your infrastructure and your buildings and your location and leases and your people. So there's a lot of conversation going on right now is what is important to that maybe mid-market. And I think it's going to vary beyond, based off the category of product that they're selling. But, do we need quick commerce? Do we need micro fulfillment with 1 day? Do we need, 2 day experience? Do we need 4 to 7? And if you just kind of look at how, we'll pick one example, DHL eCommerce as an example, like they have seen rapid growth and that's a deferred shipment option. So would just love to get any thoughts you have on that front.
This is where I love how retail is not one size fits all and how vast the space is. There are so many categories. Every category is different. Some behave more similarly to each other than others, of course, but I'm even just thinking there were a couple of things. I was in Florida last week for a friend's bachelorette party and we needed to order, I was planning it. So we needed to order a lot of decorations for the house, but we were staying at her parents' house and they were there up until the minute the festivities began. I didn't want all those packages arriving when her parents were still there. I didn't want to burden them,
Right.
Have it all on their doorstep. I wish I could have deferred shipping just to make things easier for them while they were getting ready to leave. I also think about, I bought my home a little over a year ago. I had this massive headboard that is, I'm really outing myself here. It's over 100 pounds. It's ridiculous. And I didn't want to have it waiting. I ordered it over the holidays because I moved in last January to this place. And I didn't want it sitting at my old place because I couldn't haul it myself. Yep. So I would have loved to have had deferred shipping. Then I ended up having to ship it to my house and then have movers move it, which is more expensive. It's more logistics, but then I think about sometimes I am ordering groceries and I want those immediately because it's for a recipe that I'm cooking that night and I don't want them to spoil and all of that. So it really depends on the category. There's such unique use cases in every shopping scenario. And I would love retailers to get to the point where they are so advanced that they're asking their consumers, when exactly do you need this for? That's what we'll accommodate. And I do believe that can be scalable with micro fulfillment balanced with a bigger warehouse strategy as well.
I think that can, if that's what retailers should be doing, I'll speak to it from a tech standpoint. I don't think it's that big of a deal because, most retailers have set up a 2-day type of delivery network and a lot actually have express as an option, right? It's just a matter of saying, give me a date. And guess what I can do? I would love that. I would actually, if you because we work a lot in, the transportation planning side of things and specifically how do you ship orders out of the warehouse? I know my demand pattern that Mondays are my busiest day of the week. Right? Because I've accumulated all the demand, in a traditional warehouse. Yeah, if you got a 7-day warehouse, different scenario. But usually Mondays are my busiest day because Saturday and Sunday volume has accumulated, which means getting things to people on Wednesday is one of the hardest things to do in a 2-day network. So if I can start shaping demand, that could be like, hey, if you get this on Thursday, I'll give you a discount of some sort, right? Like,
Yes.
or, some sort of credit or, and I don't think it's that hard to achieve, actually. If that's actually the need, I would say, the retailers should start working on it. And if they're, I mean, rather than just a 2-day option, a 5-day option, let me do it a date definitive thing.
Exactly. And this is where so many retail models can be kind of aggregated over time, right? You can balance things. You'll see maybe there are some types of products in particular that need to be delivered before Wednesday, but there are other types of products that people just aren't ordering over the weekend. And so that would be kind of the shift, There is so much advancement that could still happen with demand forecasting that trickles into logistics, I think is important.
Exactly. And there was at one point, Amazon had did this where they were doing if you, you were a Prime member, but if you wanted it like 3 days later, they would give you some sort of discount. I don't think that program exists anymore for some reason. I haven't seen that option lately. So
no, I've seen the option that you can defer it 2 days versus 1 day and stuff like that. But I haven't been rewarded for that. I don't think in a little while. Yeah.
So Melissa, maybe tying it back to logistics and some of the things that are going on in the space today that retailers are doing to, I think what's pretty common, or not common, but the two main ones that I wanted to focus on was like American Eagle Outfitter and the acquisition of Quiet Logistics and Gap rolling out Gap Fulfillment. And, the premise there is supply chain is not what makes you unique. And if we could have this shared infrastructure and, cut down costs and be able to deliver the same, customer experience that's required, but there's a lot that we could share, right? And supply chain being one of them with those two examples. So what are you hearing in that regard as far as like, what are your thoughts on maybe those two strategies? And do you think they're going to be more and more of that we're going to see in the coming years?
Absolutely. I love it. I think it's brilliant. I believe firmly that no retailer can be strong in every area. The path to purchase is at least a 7-step process. You cannot own the whole thing by yourself. And if you do, you won't be good at all of it. You even think about Amazon, for example, and it's great with fulfillment. It's great with how quick and easy it is in terms of a shoppable experience, but no one would really say it's delightful, that it's engaging. Amazon knows its strengths and clearly AE and Gap do as well. They know that they've figured out fulfillment, and why not double down on that? I think it's brilliant. And also they of course have to accept that their direct competitors are not going to embrace them for that. They're not going to give them their business in that department because they don't want them to have their data. But like we said, there's so many categories across retail. There are many other non-competitors that will embrace them for their fulfillment strategy. And that's fantastic. And then they can still learn the intricacies of another business that they're not directly selling in. They can become even stronger in it. And those retailers can own a different part of the path to purchase. So I think it's brilliant. And there are a lot of other retailers that also invest in and acquire, whether it's, startups or smaller scale businesses, because they start using them and they realize this could become our strength if we just bought them. So I think it's a fantastic strategy. And I love that they're doing that.
Exactly. I mean, the hope on that front would be most of the mall brands, of course, the apparel companies, because both of them mean apparel companies might not end up partnering. I mean, they might end up surprising us. It might be a different segment category they don't play in, and they might pick someone up, right? Like different conversation. But all the other mall categories that exist, if you can start aggregating, but now we fall into the same trap, right? Like what's the end state that we want to achieve? Sustainability, right? We want to try and get things conveniently to people in a sustainable manner. So I don't have 7 different trucks passing by my house every single day for different types of delivery strategies, right? And try and consolidate these shipments, because that's kind of the holy grail. Try and bring things together. And right now with both Gap and American Eagle doing, now we have a fractured strategy. So hopefully they both can come together and figure out the last mile, because the biggest challenge is the last mile. If you can try and consolidate shipments going to my house, doesn't matter if it's coming through American Eagles or if it's coming through, Gap service, if you can consolidate and bring it to my house, that's a better solution at the end of the day. So there is also partnership between these rival offerings that I see in the future that could create some sustainability.
Yeah, that's the beauty of scalability and embracing sometimes your competitors, learning from each other. and realizing that, you can win together instead of by competing against each other all the time.
Absolutely.
Yep, makes a lot of sense. And I think everything you're sharing with us, Melissa, and for everyone that's listening, that's on the logistics and supply chain of the fence, is the best way we could provide value to our customers, which are brands and retailers, is by knowing as much about them and where are the opportunities for us to again, as Gretzky said, know where the puck is going, and, really be really all in to provide that value. And I know your company, CI&T, produced the Connected Retail 2023 report.
Yes.
And you had mentioned previously, like the 7 buying steps, right? In the purchasing journey. One of the things you mentioned that was really important in that retail report was that one-to-one product creation models are a top trend for creating visibility and trust across that purchasing path. Mm-hmm. So as much as it relates to knowing how people on the logistics side could provide that value to brands and retailers, would just love to get your thoughts on, I have no idea what one-to-one product creation model is. So let me be honest there. I want to learn what does that even mean so I can provide value to my clients. But I think, anything you could share on that front and what would be fantastic.
Yeah. So the irony is we've been talking about scalability, right? And this is a little bit the inverse of that in the sense that it is designing products that are tailored to the individual. So it's kind of what Nike owned first, that like mass customization strategy where you create, overall this kind of overarching product, but then the consumer can tailor it to themselves based on what they want. And they end up ordering a one-of-one product. The reason I think this is a big part of the future is, one, sizing is so fragmented and so difficult, and it's a big driver of returns, is that consumers just don't fit into the clothes that retailers are making. So there's inherent issues in scalability with that. And then 2, with globalization, with all the diversity and trends, with the fragmentation of interests on behalf of consumers, there are just so many diverging interests when it comes to both wants and needs at a product level. And retailers that are able to cater to an individual will see repeat business in that way. That's ultimately what personalization is, right? So I was thinking about this as personalization of the product at a one-to-one level and figuring out how you can make that scalable and part of your business model so that people know they can always come to you with their unique needs. Interior Define is a prime example of a company that does this. You can kind of create your own one-of-one couch with them. That's what I was thinking with this. And I do think we'll start to see it in apparel as well, because we're having so many issues with sizing. I know, we're seeing it in the home space. We've seen it there for a while. I wouldn't be surprised if we see it in the fitness space a lot more as well, if people start designing more and more home gyms for themselves. Cars, we've already seen it in auto for a long time. So I just think it'll be a little bit more mainstream because we are so much more aware of how diverse consumers are than ever before.
And definitely on the apparel side, right? Like it just seems like on the apparel side, we are starting to see all of these take your body avatar, take pictures of yourself from multiple angles, and it figures out your dimensions and tailors the clothes to you. Mm-hmm. But does that then mean that it is being produced on demand? Or are they
just some logistical heartburn right there? Yeah. Like, I mean, that.
Yes, exactly. I think yes. I've seen a lot of smaller businesses do a lot of kind of pre-ordering, gauging interest. It allows more control over demand forecasting. So yeah, I mean, this is a juxtaposition for sure against the scalability that we've been talking about. But I think there are a lot of ways to do it in a scalable way.
I think it also kind of meets this drive down in the capital cost as far as, labor being increased. And it doesn't even matter. Even in China, labor is increasing, right? Like the cost per unit is increasing on everything. And automation is now starting to play a big part where the capital cost is not as much. For you to be able to bring in and do something that's custom is still, reasonable now. So I think we are going to, see more and more of that based on your comments and what we are seeing, at least on the automation side of the universe.
It also goes back to what you said about the 2 biggest expenses in retail, usually being leases and infrastructure and then people. it does allow you to schedule better and take kind of a less is more approach. You're not just hiring people around the clock. You're not just, enacting these factories around the clock. It goes back to kind of figuring out demand and then adjusting your business model to such.
Just in time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I mean, again, maybe it's the sustainable version of the Shein model, right? Because if I am getting a personalized, shirt, I might be okay with 2 to 3 week delivery. And so, yeah, maybe it's combining that. And the other thing is too, from, as sustainability becomes more and more important throughout the upcoming generations, you're producing less potentially, and you nailed it. I mean, when it comes to apparel, you're usually buying 2 or 3, hoping one fits. So now you cut down shipping costs, you cut out return processing, all the labor associated with that. So there's a lot there that I think is good for everybody. If you can wait, right? Will consumers be willing to give a little more time?
Exactly. You also get a lot more data on your consumer if you're designing specifically for them. They're incentivized to tell you their sizing, their age, all the details that you would need for tailoring or for design, their preferences, who they're buying for, stuff like that.
So makes a lot of sense. Well, maybe Melissa, last question for you, which again, from a logistics supply chain standpoint, just to get as much value. And as you think about trends for 2023 for e-commerce logistics, what do you think those 3 main trends are, and what is the adoption rate for retailers embracing those?
Interesting. The first one I would say goes back to kind of striking that right balance between micro fulfillment and also warehouses. It cannot be one size fits all. I think retail is a very hyper reactive industry, and we can't move too quickly towards one or the other. I think for most businesses, you'll need a bit of both. So I think it's kind of getting into the middle of the pendulum instead of swinging back and forth like we've been doing in logistics. So that's the first thing I would say. I think the second one is using logistics to get closer to your customer. So like we said, getting to know them better, their preferences when it comes to delivery, even if it's extremely situational, depending on the product category or that specific product, tailoring memberships to delivery desires. So, maybe I pay less because I promise you, the retailer, I never want anything sooner than 2 days. And so my membership will be less expensive because I'm a less needy consumer. I think, that's another kind of new subscription model that perhaps we could embrace from a logistics standpoint. I mean, I need to think a little bit more, but I do think what we talked about was really important in terms of that vertical integration and embracing newness in logistics as part of your business model, and then leveraging that to cater to other retailers instead of just owning that for yourself and kind of keeping it to yourself. So not being afraid of connecting with your competition, owning just one of your strengths when it comes to fulfillment. Maybe it's figuring out, like we said, that last mile is the biggest challenge. So if you're a retailer and you don't want to be the expert in last mile, leverage another retailer who is, and really lean into that. So I would say even further fragmentation of the path to purchase by breaking up logistics even further and figuring out what part of that to own, because it is a competitive differentiator in 2023.
Absolutely. Love it. Love it. Melissa, can't thank you enough. I think when this airs, you'll either be presenting at South by Southwest or it'll be the day after. So we want to wish you the best of luck with that. And would love for you to give everyone the opportunity to, where do they follow you? Any contact information you want to provide would be fantastic.
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn, Melissa Minkow. I like to use it as a way of creating conversations. So a lot of times I'll post articles, just that's industry news, and then ask people to engage with me and share their perspectives. And I'll put a little bit of food for thought out there as well. I try not to spam on LinkedIn. I just try to get good conversations going. So that's definitely where you can find me. Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Melissa. It's been an absolute pleasure having you joining us today. Yeah, thanks for having me.
You got it all.
Yeah, okay. We got it all. You nailed it.
Good. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Melissa.
Be sure to subscribe to the podcast to maximize your supply chain. Available on all major podcasting channels. Thank you for listening, and see you in the next episode.